internet, which means it has to be true, right? The story took place in about 1100 AD in a little Viking kingdom. Kingdom had early missionaries of Christianity that had put the gospel there, and perhaps that's where the origins of this story kind of came from. But the king was a beloved king. The people loved this king. It was a small little country, but he had the reputation of surely being the fairest king that ever lived, and also the most loving king that ever lived. People absolutely adored him. One day, the king came out to address his small island country, and he said, I have grievous and terrible news. Somebody is stealing money from the treasury. We know somebody is stealing money from the treasury. You know that as your king, I've committed to do whatever I can to take care of you. If you have a need, just come to me, but you cannot steal because that would undermine the entire kingdom. Nobody had any idea where it was being stolen, so it went on, but a couple weeks went by and money continually being stolen day by day from the king's treasury. So the king came out and brokenhearted said, somebody continues to deliberately steal from the kingdom, from the treasury. I'm going to issue a penalty, and that is 10 lashes with a whip. 10 lashes with a whip for whoever gets caught stealing the money from the treasury. And again, nobody came forward. Nobody knew who would do this. King came out a week later and said, somebody continues to steal. I'm going to double it to 20 lashes. Now it was kind of the talk of the whole country. Who's stealing from our king? King came out a fourth time and said, somebody continues to steal. It's like they're trying to sabotage the kingdom. I'm going to do something that I don't want to do, but I don't know what else to do. I'm doubling this penalty now to 40 lashes, which, because of the kind of whips that they used, was essentially the death penalty. According to this story, which again I heard is true, 2 days after the king gave that proclamation, they caught the thief red-handed. It was the king's mother. So now the king faced a dilemma because he's the fairest king that ever lived. And the people said, well, if it had been anybody else, he would give them the punishment. Hey, it's not fair for him to just turn the other way because it's related to him, because it's his mom. But then other people responded and said, but I mean, this is our king who has more love in his heart than anybody we've ever known. How could that man kill his own mother? The king asked for 48 hours to think about it. He goes into his chambers. He comes back out. He says, you have to give her the penalty. The law is the law. Justice is justice. So they marched the king's mother out like they would anybody else, and they tied her up to the stake and ripped off the back of her shirt, and that guard took that whip and he pulled it back so that he could bring that first lash across the back of the king's mother. And right before he did, the king said, stop. And the king walked over to his mother and he looked her in the eye and just said, what have you done? And then he grabbed his mother and he hugged her as tight as he possibly could. And he took off his robe and he laid it aside and he hugged her again. He looked back at the guard and he said, now hit her. And the guard said, I can't hit her because I'll hit you. And he said, I am giving you a command, and that is, I want you to give all 40 lashes to my mom. But the king stood there and took them into place so that not a single inch of that strap ever touched his mother. Thereby the most fair and the most loving king that ever lived. Friend, that's what God did for you when Jesus stepped into your place and died on the cross. Friend, you understand that God's wrath burns against your sin. There's only really two ways to pay for sin, really only one way, and it's death. And for you, death means eternity apart from God in hell. The only other way to pay for sin is that somebody who is without sin, who is themselves eternal, can pay it in your place, which is what Jesus did when he died on a cross. The prophet Jeremiah says that God's wrath is stored up for us like poisoned wine in a cup, that one day we will, all of us who have sinned and rebelled against him, all of us will have to drink it. But at the cross, as that cup was being handed to us, Jesus stepped in the way and he snatched that cup out of our hands and he drank it to the dregs and he turned it over and slammed it down on the table and said, it is finished. So that there is therefore no condemnation. Paul says that so that there is therefore now no condemnation to those who are in Christ Jesus. It's like Charles Spurgeon said, God could not hold me guilty for my sin because that would be unjust. Because God would be, if God ever punished me for any of my sin, if he punished me 1 iota, 1 ounce for anything, it would be unjust. because God has already given the full measure of his wrath, and he has poured it out on Jesus. He would have to apologize to Jesus if he punished me. Jonathan Edwards described propitiation like standing before an incredible dam. I mean, imagine the Hoover Dam. I know it wasn't around when Jonathan Edwards was around, but imagine that. Imagine you're standing in front of this dam and maybe you're half a mile away, and all of a sudden, Jonathan Edwards says it begins to crack, and it just in a moment splits open in this wall of water. Half a mile, high it seems. A couple 100 feet high is coming down this to you, and it's just going to sweep you away, and there's nowhere you can run, there's no way you can resist it. He said when suddenly the ground opens in front of you and all of that water is swallowed up in the ground so that not a drop touches you. He said what Jesus did when he died on the cross is he stood there in the way of the wrath of God, and he absorbed every single bit of it for our sin in our place. Jesus paid it all. All to him I owe.